very much. So this is still research. It's not out there.
IBM has deployed some tool for protecting their database.
Because this will play a role, of course, in when we will see it on the market. Because I have never been enabled to check the value of the functionality of a pseudonymization before, but I see many people who are on the other side and show me that it's not a well-protected data set. Okay, also in the field of research, Alessandro is working, perhaps even more in some settings that are on the horizon, and we will see. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I tried to focus my short presentation on 3 points. The first one is the framework, the second is the confusion, and the third one is the implementation. The framework. We talk a lot about privacy by design, and we have a very traditional idea of privacy as data security and data management. But as mentioned in many publications, also discussed this morning in other panels, right now, when we talk about data-intensive use of technology like artificial intelligence, the main issues are not necessarily only privacy issues. There are many other issues that show a potential effect of data use on different rights that are not privacy rights, are not data protection rights, but are fundamental rights that are already protected by the law. And so in this sense, it's part of my research, I published an article on that, and in this sense I think that we have to move from the privacy-focused approach to the human rights approach that is a bit broader approach and is consistent with the challenges represented by the modern forms of data processing. In this sense, for instance, discrimination, all the forms of bias that potentially affect the use of artificial intelligence, for instance in the field of recruitment, but also in consumer data, etc. These all issues show how the impact may be on discrimination, may be on the freedom of expression, may be on freedom of movement. Consider, for instance, the tools that are used to moderate the discussions online or provide information about your movement and tracking and so on. And this points out also from a theoretical perspective another point that is the fact that privacy and data protection as individual rights are something that represent only part of the entire picture, because now we focus more on the collective dimension of the use of data. Companies are more and more interested in knowing about which group you belongs from, not about your identity and your name and surname. This is the framework. And if this is the framework, I think that we have to fix some point. The first point is that we need probably not only privacy by design, but we need human rights by design approach that is something broader. And on top of that, there is a lot of debate about ethics. Now everyone talk about ethics, is so smart talking about ethics. But ethics sometimes is misunderstood. As a legal scholar, I have to clarify that ethics is something that is represent the root of the law and of human rights, but then human rights and law decide to shape the ethics into the law. So the law is a specific form of ethics, if you want. It's a manner in which ethics became something that is binding. And it's important not to make a confusion between ethics and law. Unfortunately, in many documents, also in the European Union, we have a lot of expert group in the European Union, and many experts make this kind of misunderstanding, representing ethical values that are already in the law, that are already protected by the law in the field of data protection or other law concerning human rights. And this is a very bad approach, because for the company, if you say to a company, this is an ethical value, the company say, oh, yeah, I can be compliant or not. I can decide to be an ethical company or not. But it's a misleading information, because the ethical value, when it's also protected by the law, is no longer only an ethical value, but is a binding requirement. And so privacy by design, minimization cannot be transformed in ethical values, because if you are not compliant, there are sanctions. It's not an ethical sanction, it's a very concrete sanction. So it's important to make a distinction between ethics and law. It means that there is room for ethics. This is the room for ethics in order to cover the issues that are not addressed by the law. And which issues? The main issue is represented by this question: which kind of world we want in the future? Consider the Toronto case about the use of Google to create a smart cities. Consider the predictive policing tools, the high border control case. Consider the Strava case. All these cases are not only about rights, but are about the fact about which kind of future we want. We can use a lot of intensive form of data exploitation that are consistent with the law, because they are consistent with many legal requirements. But the question is, do we want to accept this kind of society so deeply analyzed by algorithm? This is the ethical question. In this sense, I think, to conclude, that the last pillar is the implementation. The implementation of the ethical value, human rights value is very important. To achieve this goal, it's important to have a discussion, to have participation, to have experts in the meeting, and to reach a level of a co-design. Not simply privacy by design, not only human rights by design, but human rights and ethics by design, but through co-design approach. A company cannot do everything by itself internally. We have had to have debate when they decide to adopt technology that have high impact potentially on society. This is my point of view. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is really broadening the topic. It's more than GDPR and everything. And perhaps I heard from your words that the GDPR and the idea of sanctions may even be hindering a real ethical implementation, a real discussion, right? That's a summary.
Yeah, I think that the GDPR is an important step.
Okay.
But it's not enough. For instance, we can consider the guidelines are recently provided by the Council of Europe. There are guidance on artificial intelligence and data protection that try to have a broader approach, where they are adopted 2 days ago, so are available online. And if you look at that guidelines, we focus not only on privacy, but also human rights and ethics. Unfortunately, GDPR, in its implementation, it's more focused on privacy rather than the other aspects.
Yes, that's probably we need more and others, and probably it's not only about shaping technology, but also shaping our world, our business, our models, our regulation, and our discussion, our debates. I think a little bit in this direction is also the intervention from Achim, although you are representing a regulatory body, right, Achim?
Yes, thank you, Marit, like yourself.
I'm the neutral moderator here.
Yes. I wanted to start with Marit, who has much more to enforce, actually, because she's responsible for the private sector than the EDPS, who's only responsible. The microphone doesn't seem to work. Is there someone?
Closer, I think closer. Make it closer.
I mean, I'm virtually eating the microphone.
Yes.
Sorry? Okay. Okay. So, I wanted to start saying that Marit is in a nice position as a moderator, while in reality she has much more enforcement power, being responsible for the private sector in her area of territorial responsibility, while the EDPS is only dealing directly with public sector, even though, of course, this indirectly affects tools provided by the private sector to the public sector. So, not shying away from this, but indeed, I wanted to talk about two challenges. On the one on the shaping, actually, which is in the title of the panel, and on the enforcement. And obviously, it's what I could quickly react maybe on the previous discussion. As you know, the EDPS has engaged quite a bit in the debate on ethics already for several years. But of course, this comes as an extra on top of the tasks as a supervisory authority for data protection. And you cannot blame the general data protection regulation for not being the general ethics regulation. Otherwise, you could say the code of the streets, the traffic code, doesn't address ethics, and that would be so. And as Alessandro properly explained, ethics is by definition more than what is in the law. Okay, so the ethics question plays a role when we think of the actual shaping question of technology. When we think of shaping technology, then I would refer to the term technology as something which is not necessarily one single practical solution, but rather the set of tools provided by a general technology, and which is then used in individual solutions. And we have, as the EDPS repeatedly pointed out, that companies invest considerable amounts of design efforts in better making commercial use of personal data, while we nowhere see that the same amount of effort and resources is invested in protecting personal data or giving more transparency and control to users. And so we have often asked for that. And like what the studies that Mette Moen has presented very clearly show, that a lot of energy has been invested in making it difficult to opt out of the tracking features, while of course the same energy could have been invested in making it easy to control the data. So there is something which can be where it's very easy to implement both ethical and data protection controls in the technology. And so interactive advertising is gone down so far the way of becoming the surveillance machine that may need a complete restart to get out of this rabbit hole. But maybe for some other technologies like artificial intelligence, it's not too late to start with a new paradigm, with a different paradigm, to think of the mechanisms from the very beginning. I must admit, I find it's certainly a challenge to think from a technological perspective all the way to implementing ethical and data protection principles. I mean, there's no way to translate ethical principles in the design of neural networks or in the weighting algorithms that are used to things. So there's a lot of actually also things that would need to be in translating. But to come back to the point of challenge to the regulatory authorities, the enforcement point, there the one demand is that the enforcement must be transparent, so controllers must know against which standards they are measured. And these standards have to be comprehensive. When we think of pets and privacy advanced and enhanced technologies and solutions, often we have punctual solutions which address one aspect. So yeah, we have end-to-end encryption, but metadata is flying around over the place and can be used for proper analysis. So there we need a comprehensive solution. We need a practical way to implement it. It needs to be established and documented what is the state of the art. And then the icing on the cake is that, of course, we should advance the state of the art. There we are, I'm coming to the end, there we are challenged also in our role as public sector regulator, because the GDPR in its recital relevant to Article 25 says the public sector shall use its procurement power to advance the development of privacy-friendly technologies. So there is things which the data protection authorities have to do. Thank you.
So thank you very much. We see a little bit a glimpse at the horizon that not everything is too bad. We've heard that some industry can manage because the business model is not so much relying on personal data, you have to admit, I guess. And also because it's a nuisance if you had to deal with all the requests from customers or from law enforcement. So it's a good thing to have on-device processing and real encryption. We've seen from Grow that there are so many dark patterns out there, and if you look for them, you see even more, and that nothing has changed at 25th of May, except for one-page advertisement in newspapers that everything is fine now, with some of the big players. We've seen some ideas on new technologies that can help, because pseudonymization is a central topic in the GDPR. So if pseudonymization is still not understood and people are confused, how can it be used then in a good way? And if people think they are doing it in a good way, perhaps it is even not enough. So again, a little bit depressing with some glimpse. From the ethics, of course, we need a broader discussion, but what we also have seen that even this data protection GDPR-based discussion has not made so many changes in the first 8 months on the design thing. So if we are too narrow when thinking of how to implement technology, then we may miss something, but right now we miss a whole lot more. Therefore, I'd like to ask you at the panel, my first question here, who should have to do what? Is this something, Jason, that you expect more from research? Obviously, GROW expects something from the regulatory bodies, but probably also it's about the business models and about consumers. You're representing consumers who are buying the stuff or using the stuff. And so the first round will only take you first 3. And Cedric, are the solutions out there that we can use, or is it even more complex if we have new bodies that should do the testing or have some role in the pseudonymization? And because the company has to do something, or the public service, in implementing it, does it always require that we have more complexity and it's even harder for everybody? So perhaps first with Jason, what do you think? Who should do more now?
I think the question of who should do more is a really interesting question. I think there is a virtuous cycle that can be established. It is possible for researchers to come up with new technology primitives that companies can adapt and extend and deploy at scale, that can then be seen by regulators as a way to help enhance privacy and to understand the privacy impact of that. Just to take one example, differential privacy developed in academia, pretty well understood over a sort of period of time to mature. We take it in 2015, I may get the year off one by one, and deploy it at scale on several 100 million devices to help better understand what emojis are more popular and what words are sort of emergent, because we think that's sensitive data. And there's a long time there between academia coming up with the idea and us being able to deploy it at scale of several 100 million devices. As there's an important distinction there between sort of the conceptual work and the implementation work. But then there's another part of that process, which is informing regulators what differential privacy is and what the impact on personal data is, and making it part of a larger story of data protection. And so I think it is a virtuous cycle where there is more work to be done on all fronts, and it needs to be understood in that framework.
And of course, differential privacy is not the buzzword that already solves everything. It's a long story about parameters, about choosing the right ones, about thinking about the context, whether it's the emojis or something like medical data. It can be totally different, right?
Absolutely, and I think that goes to my last part of the virtuous cycle, which is explaining how those things matter, and that it is an ongoing educational process for all parties.
Thank you very much. So GROW, even Google did some work in differential privacy, but now they are doing the dark patterns as well. How does it how is it combined? And isn't it the role of the consumers now to make the change and really demand what is necessary? Even for the regulators, it's easier to have a good complaint, well-founded complaint, and then it's a case and we can do something, as if somebody says, there might be a dark pattern, that might be manipulation, let's see.
I think consumers can try to use common sense, but many of these systems and choice architectures have been created to confuse us and to lead us in a direction, and there's a power asymmetry here that makes it very difficult for the consumer to take control in this situation, and therefore clearly the responsibility lies in the companies who are exploiting consumer data. And I think, and now that I have Apple present here, I feel like, and we've been talking about defaults, I really want to, I just want to challenge also Apple a bit, even though you're doing a lot of good work, but I have to challenge you a bit as well, because many people are reacting to that Google is the default search engine in Safari, which is the default browser on iPhones, and that's the kind of things that makes it difficult for the consumer. If you haven't heard about the alternative, if you can't find it, you have to search around in a very human, hostile environment, which is the settings in most of the digital services we use. It doesn't enable choice, and it doesn't enable competition, and it doesn't enable the alternatives emerging. So I would like to challenge you on that, since we have.
Do you want to answer this one? Why is the Google search engine the default for Apple?
If I, having been challenged, I think I don't have an option other than to accept. It's something that's been talked about in several venues by folks, including Tim Cook. And I think one piece of the technical implementation that's worth considering is that when you're typing in the Safari address bar and your searches are going to the search engine that you've selected, Google being the default, that's actually occurring in a different process, at a different layer of the network. And so it's not sending your Google cookies to Google as part of your searches, but rather it's using a separate process that is to do so. And then if you do go onto a Google result page, we have Safari's other privacy enhancing technologies and features like intelligent tracking prevention to prevent third-party tracking. And it's part of a larger set of privacy functionality and frameworks that are present in Safari that that work together overall.
But still, the data processing by Google is not prevented by that, right? It's not totally anonymous.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. As it's not your Google cookies aren't going as part of the searches you're typing in the address bar, as it's being run in a separate network process, actually isolated from Safari. And so there's a level of technical distinction that is occurring there. But it's also, we've also built technologies to prevent sort of cross-site tracking, and we also do give users choice with things like DuckDuckGo being introduced in 2014 in Safari.
Okay, perhaps it could be that the users decide in the beginning what they want, and perhaps you could, because your third point was transparency, are people aware of that there are alternatives and what the different data processing means? Okay, you don't have to answer everything, but perhaps this is also the question to Cedric. The pseudonymization, the differential privacy thing, there have been now large-scale implementations, very good. Probably everybody's still learning in the field of differential privacy, and now pseudonymization, a central point in the GDPR. But what you propose is very good and more complex, right?
It's more complex, for sure. So we have a sketch of proof, and IBM is pushing such technology to handle their database. So it's working, but we still need some time to understand all the possible usage of this kind of technology. There are very interesting situations, for instance, in Belgium. When you want to access healthcare data, you have to go through an office who is responsible of doing some pseudonymization. And this is another possible scenario we need to take into account when we design this kind of technology, that we are going to have trusted third parties. And there is really a lot of possibility to explore, and we only start to look at it, and it will take some time for a researcher to totally consider all the possible cases and provide solution.
Yeah, Jason said also it's about communicating with the researchers and regulatory bodies. Is it also your task, you think, to communicate with the perhaps consumer protections companies and regulators?
Yeah, of course.
Not only here, of course, but you're here. That's a great thing. Because it's difficult for many to understand what is now the good solution, and perhaps then I can also get the word now, the questions to the other two people on the panels here, because if we now put on top even more, so it's not only about storage limitation, which might be an easy thing to do, or about access rights or so. It's much more complicated if we want to implement, and this is one of the words, fairness. and lawfulness, how to be aware of what is lawful or not about everything that is being handled here. And then the more complex world with artificial intelligence. Probably it's very good not to give the answer the GDPR is already tackling everything and now only do it as it's written in Article 25, everything is solved. We heard from Achim, it's not so easy, it's not understood how to implement that. But again, the question, who should do what now? Is it the parliamentarians who should invite for more debates? Is it about the standardization organizations who should be able to deliver something? Or is it only right now to be clear on awareness and perhaps some first work on implementation? But can we stop in the meantime everything that is being developed? So the question to Alessandro and Achim.
I think that we have to decide to be very generic or very pragmatic. If we want to be very pragmatic, I think that developers and companies need guidelines. And when we consider that in Europe we have 95% of small and medium enterprise, we can not only deal with this topic having in mind Google, Apple, and the big companies, because of course they have a resource, they have skills, and they're able to address this kind of stuff. The problem are the rest of the companies that are the majority, and in many cases create a system that process sensitive data and provide a solution to local administration and business. So this was the approach that we adopted in the guidelines of artificial intelligence that are specific provisions, specific address to developers, manufacturers, and policymakers. And I think that the policymakers have different tools in order to increase awareness and fairness or other general principles that are mentioned in the GDPR. For instance, an important tool is the public procurement. In the guidelines, we suggest that without, I quote from the guidelines, without prejudice to the confidentiality safeguard by the law, public procurement procedure should impose on artificial intelligence developers, manufacturers, and service providers specific duties of transparency, prior assessment of the impact of data processing on human rights and fundamental freedoms, and vigilance on the potential adverse effect and consequence of artificial application. I think that starting from public procurement is a very pragmatic way in order to try to boost his idea of being more oriented towards privacy and to more in general protection of the fundamental values of the citizen, and not to reduce all to some specific technicalities like anonymization, pseudonymization that are important but that are not at the same time so new as sometimes are depicted. Thanks.
Okay, and also the question which is now related to our regulator EDPS here, are the regulatory bodies that are existing now the right ones if we think of a general ethics regulation, something on top? Because the risks and freedom, the risk for the rights and freedoms of natural persons, this is now something that is being addressed in the GDPR, not only something with personal data. So, of course, it's related to personal data, but it could also be group discrimination. This is now something very new and not well understood yet because we have no experience here. But are there the right bodies? I asked first Achim, but perhaps Alessandro has also wanted to jump in. Achim.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had in the discussion that ethics and enforceable law are two different things. So I'm not sure that the concept of an ethics enforcement authority is not a contradiction in terms. So I cannot, honestly, I'd rather pass this to Alessandro to go into that point. But if you let me react to the question that you asked first, let me first articulate a bit what you quoted me on. It's not well understood. So what I meant is when you develop a new technology, then there is a layer of technical decisions to be made which are so far from the overlaying ethical objectives that there is no direct answer to the question, how can I ensure a certain aspect of fairness by designing the algorithms that run on my neural network.
So it wouldn't help in the procurement process to write, you have to deliver something with fairness by design.
Yeah, but you haven't a way to decide whether it does or not. Mm-hmm. And So, but for the existing, and that's for new technologies, but for the existing technologies, it's not as if we are nowhere. I mean, there has been research, not the least advanced by a certain Marit Hansen as a researcher on making data protection a measurable technical thing with defining data protection objectives in the same way as these three well-known security objectives, and that has been very influential. We had an IPEN workshop on Monday with researchers from Leuven who have developed the Lintun framework on the basis of things. We had a colleague of Marit's who could tell us about the standard data protection model, which is the German implementation of that. And we had a colleague from NIST, the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, joining in, who demonstrated and explained that the NIST privacy framework in creation is actually based on another flavor of the same principle. So there are tools, there are standards, there are things to measure. So we just have to make it operational for data protection at the regulatory authorities, but there's no excuse to say we don't know how to do it.
Okay, thank you for the clarification, and the very nice clarification, of course, because we are not there, we are not back to square one, but perhaps for ethics and new developments, we are quite nowhere, are we, Alessandro?
I think that I agree with Achim. I think it's not a problem of authority. I think that we cannot address ethics like privacy by design. Ethics is something more complicated because it's local based, is based on the specific society. In this sense, this is also the collective dimension that only a few academics are discussing about that. But the problem of ethics is not in privacy by design, the solution is minimization, pseudonymization, etc. In ethics, the problem is what we want, where we want to go. So the problem is to find different kind of tools that are based on engagement, that are based on debate, that are based on understanding the value of a community. In this sense, there's some expertise in the field of ethics committee or other kinds of board that can support the developer in order to understand that, to complete their background, because in many cases the developers have a very good background in the field of technicalities but not in the social impact of their technology. Only big companies have the chance to have a multidisciplinary group that work on that kind of technology.
Okay, thank you very much. And perhaps the ethics question would also solve some of the dark patterns, these debates, because probably dark patterns are not very ethical. I'd like to open the floor. Are there any questions from your side? Please, there's a microphone in the middle, right? Please go to the microphone. Line up if you can. No. Is it right? No, it's wrong.
I'm gonna go.
Oh,
I'm gonna.
Okay. So in the third row, we have already.
Hello? Okay, no.
No.
This one doesn't work.
Okay, here in the third row, we were first.
Okay,
that is
okay.
working.
It's working?
You have a question? No.
I don't have a question at the moment.
In the third row from.
But I would like to collect some questions. But last time we did question per question, and we didn't have the time to do a lot of questions from the audience. So I would suggest to you.
We are behaving, so you're right. The two first questions.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm Katrina. I'm from Data Ethics in Denmark. I just wanted to point something about the enforcement of law. I totally agree. That's, of course, mandatory that we have enforceable rules that can also shape the future in technology and GDPR and so on. But I will also point about the ethical aspect, because I'm a lawyer. We have ethical codes of conduct within our as professionals, because what we do, the same applies for doctors and other points, that we have a code of conduct because what we do is very essential to society. We have a very high role. We could perhaps consider that data science, technology professionals also have now such a key role in developing and shaping our society, that the ethical code to apply to this kind of professionals could perhaps be considered, and that would be enforceable. I would be disbarred if I don't follow the ethical guidelines as a lawyer.
Okay, so we were collecting first. The second question over there.
Yeah, hello. My name is Michael Wachitsky. I am a German data protection officer from a a big food manufacturing company. And I just want to share my first impression about the Article 25. It was before 25th of May last year. We invite a big law firm to discuss if they can support us in how to solve the data, the Article 25. And it was really funny. It was a lot of professional lawyers, and the discussion takes 30 minutes, and then it was over. Yeah? So what we have realized is that this Article 25 is something you can't solve alone from a law perspective. Yeah? This is where you invite all people from the business, from the line management, because it's a combined approach. You can't solve alone with the lawyers. And what we have seen also so far, as we are it's not our main business to process personal data. Our core business, and if you want to implement this Article 25, we are operating in our open heart, yes, and that means that it will take some time to identify, and it comes also maybe if we see on the directory of processing activities, the Article 30, that we get an overview about our data flows, because that was also not clear. And what I see also acting a little internal DPA for my company is that this Article 25 can be the baseline for delivering all the other demands on GDPR, and that takes a little bit time. And
I will take it as a question. Yes.
What I want to ask is what we see. How is it with academic? And what we also see is that there is not so much published on this area. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how would this be solved? Can we do something as a company, maybe to support some master thesis or whatever in that area, or this is the question.
Okay, very pragmatic question. Thank you very much. There's a third one over there. Can we take four? Because
yes, I saw also 3 other people already. So
I see 3 more now.
I
think we should take now 3 and answer, and then see whether it's.
So, hello, I'm Cedric from Noib. I would like to ask, because I cannot understand why we separate ethics and law, where we can combine them and have a good result. For example, don't you think that if we use, until we have a lex specialis for technologies like artificial intelligence, can we use privacy by design in a way to guide us how to use these technologies when they overlap? For example, how can we design algorithms or weak AIs in a way for when data subjects enforce their rights, the machine cannot be destroyed, it cannot be rendered unusable. We can use, instead of just saying it's data minimization and that's that for privacy by design, I strongly disagree, it's oversimplification. Could we use it as a ship until we have something more concrete in the future? Thank you.
Okay, we stop here for the first round. And then we try to have a second round. Not everybody can answer to each question. The first one was on lawyers, organizations, ethical codes, or other business professional codes. And I thought Alessandro wanted to answer, but Achim is pointing out.
Yep. Just to say what doctors and lawyers and some other associations have as codes of conduct are actually enforceable, because there is justice system for this. They can be fined by their professional association if they break it. Purely ethical codes of conduct, I mean, I'm a computer scientist myself, and all computer science associations have published ethical codes of conduct. Only there is no such thing as the chamber of computer scientists, and so you're not pushed out of the chamber, so there's no enforcement mechanism similar to that for doctors or lawyers.
And even that is not handled very often in that way. So barring a lawyer, I see much more direct frequency.
Yeah, if I might add, I think that the problem is also that when we consider doctors or lawyers, they have a very specific topic and a relationship. So they work only in a specific sector with specific kind of relation and with specific object. Data scientists do the broad and extensive use of data-intensive system. It's very difficult to say what is the ethics. There are different kind of ethics, because you can use artificial intelligence for war, you can use artificial intelligence for health, you can use artificial intelligence for other purpose, and each purpose has a different kind of ethical background. And this is another challenging aspect in working on a general code of conduct. Of course, codes of conduct are the good way to address this topic, but I think not based on the kind of professional profile, but based on the specific application of artificial intelligence, specific field in which artificial intelligence should work.
Okay, time is running out, but we want to answer those questions. We answer only those 3 questions. Athena wants to say something, and in between we get 1 sentence each from you, but this question or the next one I think is more be dedicated to research. Is it helpful for the DPOs? Cedric.
So how can DPO and academics can work? The first difficulty is that for computer scientists it's difficult to understand the law. And so I'm lucky that in my team we work with a lot of lawyers, so we have a good connection, and we start to understand the text a bit better. I've been contacted by a lot of DPOs to know, okay, how we can work and how to do it. I have not found yet what is a good interface if we need to have intern, master thesis or PhD thesis. To be honest, I have been even contacted by a French association of DPO, and we are in discussion on how we can work and how we can help them to treat some cases. But I have no really the solution. Certainly master thesis, and to have good connection with some research team and formalize the cooperation with some student is certainly a good way, because it will be at the benefit of the company at the end and not pure academic research.
Yes, so having a thesis could deliver your results where it's not one size fits all, but of course asking for modules or instruments or building blocks, this is something which also relates to the next question, I think. Is there something where we can be more helpful? Is there something where you get also to know whether you are there or not? And for your specific question, probably for the DPOs, some help is good, and also discussing with others who have the same problem. This could be also good in the DPO organizations. For the 3rd question, anybody? Because we are running out of time. Otherwise, we will tackle them after the panel, if you like. If you want to address your question to a specific person and take it offline. I have one more question for each of you. If we meet again in 3 years' time here, and let's have a meeting here, where are we? Are we much better or not? Has nothing changed? Only 30 seconds per person, please. Jason. Time is running.
It's a very weighty question for 30 seconds. I think one thing that's really interesting that I hope will have changed where we meet again in 3 years is that there's a lot of talk about tech companies all sort of behaving the same, when in fact I think they're fairly individuated, and a better understanding of how each company is different is really valuable for everybody in the ecosystem. Just to draw one contrast, Gro talked about the location history on Google and how it is on their servers and they have access to it. On contrast, Apple has maps where we're using a random identifier that rotates every 15 minutes, and we don't have a similar server-based location history. The location history we do have is significant locations on your device encrypted to your passcode. So it's just a radically different notion of data and privacy, but sort of everyone talks about tech as one conglomerate, and I think having a better understanding in 3 years' time would be significantly helpful.
Okay, thank you. Gro.
Thank you. In 3 years, I hope privacy is the default, data protection is the default. And to get there, I think that the authorities need to set some examples showing that using a manipulative design to trick users into data sharing is outside of the law and not viable in the GDPR.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that your expectations can be met. Cedric.
So in 3 years, I hope we have designed all the tools needed for authorities or citizens to control all the protection, all the processing made by the data controller to protect their personal data.
Okay, so citizens are able to control what is happening with their personal data.
At least data authority, but the best is citizen.
3 years, okay. Alessandro.
I'm pessimist. I think in 3 years we cannot change a lot, but in 3 years maybe we have a more clear interpretation of GDPR. That is an important point from data protection authorities and from courts. And in 3 years probably small, medium companies start realizing that privacy, human rights, ethics, all this stuff can be considered.
Okay, next time I ask you the question about when we meet in 20 years' time, but Achim, 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years ahead are very challenging for data protection authorities for many reasons, with the GDPR to be implemented in all areas across the board. But in the data protection by design field, I think we have the tools like SDM, like privacy engineering framework of NIST, like Lintun, like others, and it's now the task of the data protection authorities to bring that into practical operation in such a way that courts understand what's happening, and that one thing does not happen, that just because it's mentioned in Article 25 as an example, people think data protection by design is pseudonymization, which it is definitely not. This is just one measure which may play a role in some context. And some member states liked it very much, so that's why it's mentioned all over in the GDPR. But it's not the same as data protection by design, by far. Thank you.
I know some of these member states. Okay, so the final words go to Athena.
Okay, many thanks for the discussion. I was actually too ambitious to think that I would like to make a summary of all this discussion, which we don't have the time, of course. I only want to say very quickly that I would like to finish with an optimistic message rather than the pessimistic, let's say, approach slightly, as Marit said in the beginning. And let's see, in 3 years' time, a better interpretation is already a very big step, taking the let's say, softer approach of Alessandro. Privacy by default will be for sure amazing. So many thanks to all of you. Thank you on behalf of ENISA also, and thank you all of you for attending.